Hi everyone, I'm Jen Girardi. I am a conscious parenting coach. I coach polyamorous people and polyamorous parents and unconventional humans to lead deeply fulfilling lives. And today we're talking about boundaries again because boundaries are apparently the theme lately. Apparently that's a thing for everybody. Okay, so specifically today we're talking about what happens when you set a boundary and somebody doesn't like it. Because you may have noticed that when you set a boundary with your kids, with your partner, with your parent, with colleagues, a lot of times people will get upset about it. And you've probably heard from me, if not from so many other people, because this has been such a thing lately, that boundaries are for you, not something you make somebody else do. And that is really important, and that is a really important that's the first step. You cannot set a boundary on what somebody else does because you actually don't control what somebody else does. So that's we're all coming in with that same definition. Boundaries are what you will or will not do, and they can be internal. I will or will not, time, energy, effort, emotions here. I or I will put them here because that's me. Um, or they can be external. I will or will not answer the phone, answer the door, let you come visit me, let you stay in my house, talk to you about this particular topic, um, and so on and so forth. But they're what I will or will not do. That's a boundary. Now, when we start setting the boundaries, though, when we start actually doing that in our lives, sometimes people are like, oh, great. Thanks for letting me know so I can support you in that. And sometimes people are like, how dare you? Or if you aren't going to do this for me, then I'm going to, take something from you, or I'm not going to do something for you, or we can't be in relationship anymore. We can't be friends. We're going to get divorced, whatever it might be, if you are going to have this boundary. Or if it's a small child, it might be, throwing themselves on the floor and screaming. All of those are versions of that. And usually the thing I hear most often is that the first reaction for people who've had a hard time setting boundaries is that they walk it back, or they're tempted to walk it back. They're tempted to remove that boundary. And that makes sense. The way you get to that place where you don't set the boundaries you need is because you're trying to stay in connection. And this happens when we're so young. Usually it starts when we're so young that we have no words for the experience. We just know that if we say no, or we have a boundary with someone, we stop getting all our needs met, or we stop having connection, or we stop feeling close. So it makes sense that as adults, the first reaction when somebody is not receptive to the boundary is that we remove the boundary so that we can stay in connection. We go, oh, no, no, never mind. Never mind. We're still friends. It's all good. We're still close. Everything's fine. And we don't stop needing the boundary, but we stop enforcing or expressing or having the boundary. And then resentment can build, anger can build, confusion about like, okay, I thought I was supposed to have boundaries, but then I tried and it didn't work. And so what I really want to dig into today is what happens when somebody's not happy about the boundary that you set, because it's all information. It's information. You're allowed to have boundaries. I want you to hear this. You're allowed to have boundaries even if people don't like them. And when you're really, really clear about a boundary, generally you can hold it even if somebody doesn't like it. So the classic example is a toddler's about to run out in the street and you stop them and they have a tantrum, fall down on the ground and scream about it. But generally, most parents are really, really clear about my toddler cannot run out in the street in front of a car. And so most parents don't then go, oh, okay, go ahead to the toddler. They, they might react in different ways depending on their own experiences with feelings to the toddler's reaction, but they generally don't remove the boundary because the toddler's upset about it. So that's the classic example of like, yeah, we actually, when we're that clear on a boundary, we generally can hold it no matter how upset somebody is. So one part of this is getting that clear about what boundaries you need. And some part of that also can be trial and error. Sometimes you don't know exactly where the boundary needs to go until you try putting it somewhere and then realize, ooh, I actually don't need it to be quite that far out. So bring it back, or actually, that wasn't enough. I'm still feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, taken advantage of, whatever it might be. So I actually need the boundary further out. So the more clarity we get as we try out the boundaries and figure out where they go, the easier it gets to hold them. But also, there's this piece of how somebody reacts gives you a lot of information about where they're at and where the relationship is at. Because I can tell you this from personal experience as well as theoretical understanding, that in a healthy relationship, when both people are individually healthy emotionally, and there's a lot of emotional maturity, and there's a lot of health in the relationship, when a boundary is expressed, the range from the other person is something from, great, thanks for letting me know, to maybe, I don't totally understand, can we talk about it, to, ooh, that's bringing up a lot of stuff for me, I'm going to need to take a little time with that. So you can hear that it doesn't necessarily mean somebody's thrilled about the boundary, but there's a clear, if I'm feeling something about your boundary, that's mine to deal with. And there's a clear, like, can we have some communication about this? If there's, something that's not feeling good. And there's a general acceptance of your right to have the boundaries you need, regardless of what somebody else thinks of them. So that's what it looks like in a healthy relationship. So when somebody yells, tries to tell you you're not allowed to have the boundary, tries to push on the boundary, or bring situations in which it feels impossible to have the boundary, which is a way of pushing, has a tantrum about the boundary, all of these kinds of things, or rejects, pulls away because of the boundary. And any of those are information. They're information either about that person's emotional maturity, mental health, ability to cope, or it's information about the relationship, about how much connection there is in the relationship, how much reciprocity there is in the relationship, whether the relationship is securely attached or not. That it's not. If someone's reacting that way to your boundary, it's information that the relationship is not securely attached. Uh, so first of all, it's usually good information that the boundary was a good idea. The boundary was probably necessary because there probably wasn't enough health in the other person and in the relationship for you to navigate challenges without clear boundaries. So first of all, bad reaction to your boundary is usually a good sign that the boundary is needed. And second of all, it's also sometimes a sign that the other person wouldn't be complaining if they weren't afraid things were going to get worse for them. So if somebody else is having a great time with you doing all the emotional work, for example, in the relationship, and you're putting in a boundary, and you're putting in a boundary, you're not going to do their work for them anymore. Of course they're going to be mad, right? Of course they're going to be mad because they were benefiting from you not having that boundary. So it can be information about how overextended you were, or how much that wasn't yours you were taking on. And it can be information about how much somebody else was benefiting, even if they wouldn't have put those words to it, even if they're not, this does not mean that everyone is like intentionally manipulative, trying to take advantage of you. These things happen unconsciously. that somebody else having a boundary and not overexerting might make their life harder, or might stop covering up for some challenges that they've been avoiding. A lot of times in partner relationships, there's a dynamic where somebody is doing emotional work that isn't theirs in order to enable the other partner to not have to deal with their own challenging emotions or their own attachment history or things like that. And so when a partner places a boundary of, I'm not going to do that work anymore that isn't mine, the other partner can really sometimes go into a spiral because they're suddenly being forced to deal with things that they haven't had to deal with. So if there's enough health, if there's enough capacity, it may be possible to help that person find their own support, or to name that, hey, maybe you should talk to somebody about what you're now dealing with. That isn't me, because I've said I'm not going to be available for that, or I'm going to be available for it this much, not this much, or whatever it might be. Uh, so yeah, you get to then take that information and go, okay, what does this mean? What does this information mean? And it doesn't mean you're not allowed to have boundaries, but it might mean there are more boundaries that are needed. It might mean there's some kind of communication needed with that person. It might mean that there needs to be a little bit more space, a little bit more separation so that you can take care of you. Um, there are lots of potential layers, but the important thing that I really want you to hear is that if someone reacts badly to your boundaries, it doesn't mean the boundary's bad. It means information about them and about the relationship. And then you can take that information and interpret it, understand it, decide how to act on it, just like any other information. And all of this, I feel like all these examples I'm giving are not very concrete because there's just so many types of relationships and types of boundaries that we might have. So the other piece that I really want you to hear is like every boundary and every relationship and every piece of information, they have these common elements of what boundaries are, but they also are all different and unique. And so that's where me and people like me come in, is that we can help with that, getting clarity about the boundaries. We can get help with how do you communicate them. We can help with interpreting whatever information you get when you set a boundary. We can help with if the person you're setting a boundary with then needs some support to deal with the boundary. So those are all things that I do in small groups and one-on-one. So if you're trying to navigate boundaries and feeling like you could really use some help figuring out those pieces, then reach out and connect with me. And I look forward to talking to you soon.